Hey everyone, welcome to the Matt Report. I'm your host Matt, and I interview folks who make a living using WordPress. Today I'm joined by Andy Stratton. Andy, how are you?
Hi. Good, man. How are you?
Very good. So Andy's a freelance WordPress developer, founder of Sizable Interactive, which is a cooperative of WordPress professionals, and recently launched WP Maintainer. I got that correct, right? WP Maintainer?
Yes.
Contributor to the WordPress plugin repository. Submitted a few patches over his time. Loves animals, exercise, outdoors, arts, music, films, and all sorts of stuff. So Andy, take us down that journey, who you are, what you do day to day.
Cool. So I'm a freelance WordPress developer. I used to be a freelance web developer. I kind of changed that a couple of years ago to WordPress because it's about all I do. My background, I guess you want me to go back through history. My background is I was a little nerd in middle school and used at the rise of AOL 3.0, was really into making ASCII art, which we called macros in the AOL world. So you would see them scrolled in chat rooms, and I was in little gangs and things like that. I think I thought I was hardcore. I was really just a big nerd. And I used to do that, and I wanted to figure out how can I make my own, like software to code these ASCII art things, which basically it was a glorified text editor with like Photoshop filters. You would replace like a pipe character with a semicolon, and that was to lighten it, things like that. And I wanted to figure out how to do that, so I started. I had pirated software at the time. I mean, all this crazy stuff was going on in private chat rooms, and I would somehow get my hands on software and see someone else's code and learn from that. And that kind of moved into high school. I was really into like music, and I was into acting. I did a lot of theater and stuff like that. So I would make really stupid, goofy skits and things on my computer that I wanted to send to my friends. It was like the rise of Napster and MP3s and things like that. So I was making MP3s, and we were trying to make music and stuff. And I was like, well, how can I get this to my friends without trying to email it to them? Because at the time, there was no broadband. So I was like, oh, I can put this on a website? How do I make a website? So around like 12 years old, I started with like HTML, Tripod, GeoCities,
Yes, sir.
Angel Fire, animated GIFs, all that stuff. So that's kind of where all that started, like the programming bug. And the goal of getting into the website stuff was more to, it always came from a passion to do something, make something happen. And it was a movement towards that. So it was a means to getting another goal. So I loved it, but it was also, there was always a bigger purpose to it. It was never just the code, which is interesting considering I'm a developer, because you get a lot of developers that are just, they love code. And I don't hate code, but sometimes I need a break from code. So I kind of moved from that into HTML, and as CSS kind of came along, and the rise of web standards. I was in college. I was going to college for information systems. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Not a lot of, we had a couple of programming classes in there, like C++, things like that, but it was really diet. And in my senior year, I had a friend who did a lot of PHP development. So I asked him if he could give me a couple pointers, point me to a few places to learn about PHP. Started to teach myself that, had a database class, and instead of using Access, I taught myself MySQL, and we used PHP and MySQL for our project. We had the best project in the class too, because we could design it. Started doing that, and then my last semester I took a senior level web design class, and it was an HTML class. And I went in and I was like, can I show you some of the stuff that I'm doing? I'm trying to teach myself. I think I might want to do this for a living. And the teacher was like a grad student basically, because it was an intro class, and he looked at it and he was like, oh yeah, we're not even going to go into some of that stuff. You're doing like CSS, and he's like, we're not. And I was like, it's a senior level class.
Yeah, no.
So that was a nice foreshadowing to maybe I should try and do this. So took my first job, got out of school, had like about 2 years worth of time from college to my first like 6 to 8 months of my career out of college, working tech support at a CAD software company, like a lot of 5 a.m. nights, just going home, took a nap, would work out, and just hammer away until like 4 or 5 in the morning, just learning stuff, just like imbibing things about the web. Making sites, breaking sites, which was breaking things is probably the best way to learn, at least for me. You break it and then you have a panic that you have to fix it. You figure it out. Necessity. So kind of went from there to working a couple of jobs and jumping around doing web development after that first job. And it's all self-taught, which I kind of think is the best way to learn. moved from like, I was at like a government contractor for a couple months. Then I was at like a healthcare company for a while, moved from there to back to the government contractor, moved from there to I worked for AOL for a little while, which was ironic because my account used to get canceled. Like that was where it all started. So when I was signing that paperwork, it was my first job in Baltimore City for ad.com. And it's an AOL property, so all of the HR paperwork was for AOL. And I was like, oh, that's funny. You guys used to cancel my parents' account all the time because I was shady stuff. So moved from there to a friend's agency and worked there for about a year. And that's about the time where the WordPress involvement. Actually, at AOL, I worked with Matt Marks, who is civil on Twitter. He's a core contributor. He works with Rackspace. So that was kind of where Matt was doing a lot with WordPress then. I think he was even contributing to core back then. He had wrote a handful of plugins at the time that were really popular. He had done a couple of other like mini apps that were getting popularity. And he was like the server administrator for the department I worked in. So we became friends, and I actually manage Page Restrict as a plugin I have in the repository that Matt actually wrote for me for a client that we released. And then Matt got really busy, so I just took ownership of it. And so now I manage it. So from there, I kind of moved on. And after the agency thing, it was kind of getting to a point with freelance that I was like, I don't know, I need to pick one or the other. And I picked me. So yeah.
Nice. When you made that decision, was it an aha moment with freelancing, or was it an aha moment with, hey, I found this WordPress software and I think I can make a living with this stuff?
It was a little bit of both. So I have to say it was a 50-50 thing. So it was enough because I was doing a mixture of work at the time. When I would talk to people and they go, oh, what do you do? Now I say, I'm a WordPress developer. And if they're like, well, what's WordPress? I'm like, oh, let me tell you. But back then I was like, oh, I do HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, MySQL, SQL. And I would list like such a huge list of things I was working on, I don't know, can I name other content management systems?
Yeah,
I would work on Joomla sites. It was painful for me, and it was rough, but I would work on anything because I was also in that mode where I was really hungry, but I was also really scared. I had no experience in terms of working for myself, how to forecast anything. I had no background yet.
Yeah.
But the other half of it is the agency I worked with, which is also my first WordPress experience was with them, but before I worked there. They were doing WordPress sites and they were making money. And I was like, I do this every day. Like I could do this for myself. I was like, and I do a good job at it. So,
yeah.
And it was the first piece of open source software that I kind of worked with that I didn't, for me, like going back to the early days, sorry, my screensaver kicked on.
That's okay.
Going back to my early days of, let me turn on caffeine. When I was learning stuff, I always had this thing where it was always more about what can I do with the code as opposed to like what kind of crazy code can I write?
Right.
And WordPress was the first software that has both of those. Like there's all kinds of amazing code in the core that, I've been on projects like with some people like automaticians before where we talked back and forth because they would do like code reviews of things. And they were like, you're doing a good job, but here, check this out, or how do you feel about this? And they just more or less consulted, kind of reviewed and gave feedback and criticism. And it was awesome because it was just certain things that the philosophy of that code, that software is really, really smart and it works. And I've applied it to other projects and other things that I've written that are either on WordPress or custom things I've written that run on WordPress or not. And it's just, I've never been wronged by them or been like pissed off later by following those philosophies, and it works really well. So it's the first type of software where I'm like I guess I'm a day walker. I'm a code, but I'm thinking more about just my head's not in the dark techno music code. I'm very much like I need to have another reason for it, and WordPress gives it's so 360. It's perfect. So
yeah, one of the later questions that I have is, dealing with the WordPress community and dealing with not so much, dealing primarily with the developers in the WordPress community, but especially some of their intricacies. And Tom McFarlane, one of my past interviews, said that he finds developers to be some of the most arrogant people that he's ever dealt with because there's that high level. I want to ask that question later, but in this series, Do you remember that first WordPress project? Was it with that agency you were working with?
It was. It was with an agency I used to work for, and I still have done a little bit of work with them today. And they've kind of their focus has shifted. I think they still do WordPress stuff, but they're very focused on e-commerce things, and they use like really big e-commerce platforms. But yeah, so it was a freelance assignment. I was actually friends with the owner, and he was like, "Yeah, I got some work I need to get done. We're doing a site." It was around like it was in the low twos. That was the version of WordPress, so like 2.2. So it's somewhere between 2.2 and 2.3. It was before 2.3 because I know that the admin UI wasn't 2.3 yet, but it wasn't. It was not a 1 point anything. I first started using around 2, and it was like a team member plugin. They needed like team member profiles and a section that displayed them and like a search for them and stuff like that. And it took me forever because I never touched the software before. I knew nothing. And I think at the time the codex was really small, and I printed it out. And I had folders for each section of the codex like sprawled out in my living room at night, being like, I don't know anything about how to interact with this stuff. Yeah. And I'd never really worked with API. I just was a PHP developer. So I would write PHP scripts like forms and things like that. Most of the companies I worked for were all PHP sites. So, and I wrote a custom like MVC framework that I would use for stuff at the government agency I worked for. That was great and it worked well, but I was like, I know my stuff, I don't know WordPress. So I remember being sprawled out, sort of stressed because it was new, but more so just being like, oh, okay. And then being like, oh, this is readable. Like it was the first thing that was readable that I would see too. Like there were variable names that made sense. Like it wasn't like C240967. It's the content for content ID 22, like things that don't make sense. Everything was very logical and readable, like the code is poetry thing. Yeah. Really, I think that's part of the wide acceptance is that code is poetry kind of mantra goes from code to UI to everything, to the entire experience of using it. And that's why there's like actually Otto 42. I think he works with Audrey, but he's also on .org, I think too. He made a really cool comment to me like a couple years ago where he was like, well, here's WordPress and other CMSs. He was like, you have a lot of, because I get a lot of bounce back like, oh, well, you know, I have this CMS from clients. They'll be like, I have a CMS that does this, and I'm like, okay, do you need all that? Right. Two, they're like, well, this already has all this stuff. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, I had a conversation with him. I was like, yeah, I'll get pushback about that. He's like, well, you kind of have these two lines about how much you get out of the box and how like the barrier to entry. He was like, and how easy it is to work with and start working with and build things for. And it's kind of like WordPress is almost the opposite of all the other platforms that come with so much stuff that they detail. So WordPress has a lot built in and a lot of flexibility. But in terms, some of the other ones that are out there, well, you know, they have these huge, massive lists of things that you can do out of the box. Most people don't need them. But the other thing is too, is like you're walking into this thing where you're holding 80 hats instead of coming in with one and slowly adding another, which makes a lot of sense. I think that just, it's a less overwhelming experience, both for a user and the admin, as well as someone who's like, how do I code for this?
Right. Yeah. So, I think that at least so far, what I'm experiencing with your personality and your outgoingness, I think that you were able to look at WordPress as something that you said, I want to learn this. I want to learn how they're doing it. I've seen some pieces of WordPress of their code, and it looks great, and there's reason behind it. So I want to take the time to learn this. Whereas you might have other developers, like you said, headphones on, techno music. I'm just a PHP developer. I don't even want to learn your WordPress stuff. And if I have to use WordPress, I'm not even going to entertain like a Gravity Forms to make forms. I'm just going to make my own form because I want to do it myself.
Yeah, you get a lot of like, there are certain things where I'll run into it's generally a more social like community. It's and not even just social like interactions, but more so human community. You know what I mean? It's a lot more like you'll see people sitting together at a table coding and like 3 people like next to them. I remember sitting in WordCamps San Francisco 2 years ago, and I was sitting with Ryan Duff, and I think Jen Finch was sitting next to us, and we started like I was trying like the big thing was me like submitting a patch for core. I had never done it, and I was speaking about some community stuff and things about community and things about contribution outside of core stuff. And Aaron Campbell spoke with me about core, and the whole thing was like, I will submit a patch before the end of the year, which I did. I submitted 2, but we were looking at something, trying to see a bug that I found so I could report it. And we're sitting there looking at, and just people start like kind of gathering and seeing what you're doing versus, I don't know, kind of just weird developer animosities you see in other communities and things like, you know, like pissing contest stuff. You don't get a whole lot of that in this community. It's a lot more, you definitely have segments of like designers, developers, things like that, that are these subgenres of the community, but it's not as, I don't know.
Yeah. I go back to when Drupal, my first experience with the CMS was Drupal, and I still love Drupal. I love the power that it has. I obviously hate some of the complexity of it. I'm not a hardcore developer at all, but I remember going to my first DrupalCon in Boston, and you know, there are very few DrupalCons compared to WordCamps, but when you go to a DrupalCon, it's like corporate environment and then developers, and that's it. And you can see you can see investor dollars walking around, you can see government dollars walking around because they're using this CMS in their platform. So there's that very you know, split down the middle, but you can definitely see some.
Yeah, I think that's one of the nice things about WordCamp specifically. And I guess I would say, I think Pressnomics was, I didn't get a chance to go out, but it was a little more of a formal, I don't want to say formal because I wasn't there, but more of a, it was a paid conference. And even the response I saw from that was overwhelmingly positive and social and like human. Like I like using the word human. Like, and I think that they do a really good job of with WordCamps trying to, because I actually organized Baltimore's this past year, and Andrea and the team and the foundation all do a really good job of trying to just keep you informed that, you know, this isn't, you know, WordCamp sponsored by so-and-so with advertising plastered everywhere. The focus is truly to try to focus on content and people. And I think that's important because it's reciprocal. Like actually, one of my sessions at WordCamps is about how that is WordPress. Like we exist because of WordPress and WordPress exists because of us. And we both have to support each other. And as long as that, I think that complementary relationship continues, like this, there's no stopping that community.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing. We had our very first WordCamp in Providence, Rhode Island, which is closer to me than Boston is, and it was amazing. Sold out first time. A bunch of us organized it, and it was a great event. I can't wait to do it again. Pressnomics, I saw that come through the Twitter feed, and I was like, "What is this? This is awesome!"
Yeah.
You know, I want to go to this next year.
I have to go next year when that happens. I'm kind of regretful that I didn't make it, but
yeah, it's definitely going to make that. So let's go into freelancing and running your business. Give us a rundown of your daily routine. Is it a set? You know, do you have a set time frame? Do you time box, time management? How do you get through your daily day?
I'm a horrible example of that. So I'm usually, I have a couple of philosophies with that, and they work for me, and they might work for other people, but they might not. I think I saw some of Tom's interview too, where he's like, I'm 3 days here, I'm 2 days here, I do this, and I don't really have that. I actually did start a co-working space.
Nice.
A year and a half ago. We had some issues, like landlord issues, so we had to shut that down this year, but it wasn't a community issue, which is, I guess, good and bad. It was kind of bittersweet, like, the community's here, it's the landlord's fault, but I still had to close the space. And I really enjoyed that. And then I started to find for me that I shouldn't be around people if I need to get work done. It's just my personality. I loved being around people. Like, it was great not sitting in my house every day, all day, which is a good thing to balance. But I don't work well. Like, I'm too interested in what's going on and having conversations and cracking jokes and being like, let's go to lunch, let's do this. Like, I'm too into that. So I have to kind of pull myself out. So my days usually consist of me with headphones on at a coffee shop or at home. I'm also kind of a big believer for me that if I'm sitting and it's just not happening, like if I'm sitting here and trying to code something and it's frustrating, it's taking me a long time to do something I know should take me less time, I feel like something about me at the time and my energy is not optimal for that. So I'll walk away. Like I'll go to the gym, I'll go run errands, a lot of times I take my dog for a walk. If anyone follows me on Twitter, I have like a really kind of eerie, creepy relationship with my dog. She's like my daughter. But I'll take her for like a walk for an hour and just zone out with some like trippy music on and disappear to like a park 2 miles away in the city. and then come back, and then I'm like, okay, I'm ready to sit down and do this because I wasn't before. So I kind of think like this makes no sense, but I would always say this phrase like you have to walk away to come back to a problem. So I'm like, I can't sit here and I can't count how many times I've spent 4 hours. And I remember in my old house, 4 hours doing something. I'd get up, I'd go to the gym, I'd come back, I'd sit down at like 11:30 at night just to look at it one more time and be like, oh, semicolon. And everything worked. Or I'd be like, oh, wait, and this one line in thousands of lines of code, this stupid simple mistake, which I tend to do a lot. I'm a horrible typist, I'm finding.
Yeah. Really, that's great advice because, by day, I'm project management and business development and sales. And if I'm, going through and updating a bunch of projects or going through the pipeline, figuring out what's the next step or doing some quality control checks on some sites, there comes to a point where you just get overloaded and you're like, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go for a run. That's my favorite thing. Go for a run, 3-4 miles, just clear my head, an hour, come back, sit down, get back to it. And I think that for the young developer coming up or the young freelancer just starting off, I think sometimes they might think, hey, this is great. I don't have to report to an office. I can just wake up whenever I feel like it. Of course, you have to pay the bills, but I think when they kind of get that freedom, if they can't see that line between taking a break and getting back to work, then there's going to be trouble, down the line.
Or the line of stopping the break too. I think a lot of people I've seen some people fall to that because they're like, oh, well, I don't have a boss. It's like, because there's a big myth that there's no work involved in working for yourself, and it's about 4 times the amount of work than when you work somewhere else. Because I'll talk to people all the time, like, what do you do? Or I run into friends like, what are you doing now? And I'd be like, oh, I work for myself. I do this and this. And they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. You're so lucky. You can wake up whenever you want. And I was like, yeah, but whenever something bad happens, it's my fault. I was like, whenever there's a problem, whenever there's stress, it's mine. I was like, I don't get to leave anything at the office, like, which is where an office actually does come into great play. Like separating that is a really big deal. I do that at home a little bit, and I'm trying to remember, it's a designer, and I think he's from England, that wrote a book about freelancing and leaving your job. And I can't remember his name. If I think about it, I'll post a comment to the article because I would like giving credit. But he was like, it was really simple, but I used to do it in my old house and it worked really well. He was like, when you're working, have your shoes on, and when you're not working, have your shoes off. And it's this weird little psychological trick, but it really works. Like any day that I'm working without shoes on or in sandals, unless it's summertime, if I'm in sandals, I'm like, my mind is so scattered and disorganized and bleeding between personal and work life all day. But if I put on if I'm dressed and completely dressed, my whole just vibe for the day changes. Like I get more stuff done, I'm more productive. One thing that helps a lot too, that sounds really weird, but it upped my productivity, was sitting on a stability ball every other hour.
Yep.
Yeah, it really, I think a lot of it has to do with your body compensating for balance. Yep. So you have this subconscious making you more aware of what's happening, and it translates into work. I think they do it in schools too.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. It's funny you bring up that example of getting dressed, because I actually worked from home yesterday. It was really bad. Well, you're kind of close to me. It was a rainstorm. It was, it just didn't feel like driving to the office. And so I worked from home, but I was dressed, and my girlfriend says, why are you're dressed? Like if I was working from home, I would just, be in my pajamas, sitting there, slippers on and just sitting there. No, I have to get dressed. It's part of the routine. It makes me feel like I'm here to work. It's those little things that really...
working in sweatpants every day is, some of the things you do if you're in sweatpants every day is sometimes like you're depressed.
Right.
So if you dress depressed every day, you start to get depressed. It's like,
Yep.
You don't want that. Like, it takes its toll because you feel like you've never done anything with you could be the most successful freelancer in the world and just be really sad because you wear sweatpants all the time.
So take us down some of the very early days with freelancing. How did you, and I like to dub the $500 club, where either clients are asking for the $500 website, or there's those freelancers starting out who are pitching the $500 solution that we all get angry at because we want to have it done right. How did you deal with the $500 client? How did you scale yourself up from that? In the early days.
Most of my, I guess in the early days, I think I was the $500 freelance. Well, not when I went freelancing. I was part-time for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I think I remember my first big paying site was a custom application. It was a job board that had all these features, and I think it was like $1,000. No, it was less than that. It was like 800. And I was so excited about that. And when I think back now about the functionality that was there, I mean, of course, the quality of code is drastically different now too. It's like 6, 7 years ago. But I'm like, what was I spent like 2 months doing all this stuff for this guy every night, this whole huge thing. I was doing usability tests with my dad, be like reading the paper. I'd be like, can you go complete these 10 tasks on this? And I'd watch him and I'd be like, oh man, he can't find anything. And I was like, the site sucks. So I went from that and slowly a mixture of keeping myself full in terms of availability so that I couldn't pick up cheap work was kind of, it wasn't necessarily a strategy. It was just, I'm kind of a workaholic. So I would keep myself busy. And there's also, it's kind of hard because of just my personality and I guess background. I feel really weird. And I still do, and I'll do it now more just because I'm thinking of it logically versus, like, I guess, like emotionally or like my initial reaction. But it feels really weird to say no to someone who's like, I'd like to pay you money to do something from home that I'm telling you you're good at. Like, I feel this weird, like, don't say no, never say no to that. Why would you say no to that? So, and sometimes you need to, and I've gotten a lot better at identifying red flags in projects. In fact, I had an email back and forth with someone the other day that was, oh, we need this, 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 and this, and they were telling me about they need me to do stuff for their client, and I was like, I've picked up 2 red flags already, and I was like, this is just, I'm gonna back out. I'm gonna say no from here. I was like, I don't mean it to be rude. I was very like polite about it, but I was like, let me know if you have more WordPress stuff come up, but this is not a good place to be. You should be careful too. Like, but
it's tough. It's tough, especially when the folks are first starting out. I was the $500 guy. You know, you might have been the $500 guy or less. I just interviewing Amber Weinberg this morning, and she said I was taking clients even less just to start getting money in because I needed to, and just kind of growing it from there. But you bring up a good point. Once you start getting better and you start elevating yourself, more clients are coming in. You can kind of scan for those red flags, and that's awesome that you're able to do that. But that only comes with experience. And eventually, as you get better, you'll start to see that. I have a red flag set up for tomorrow, which I already know is going to be an issue. And he called in last week. I've sent him 2 emails to kind of go through the outline, and I've yet to receive a response. And and he dropped the line over the phone like, I want to be on the first page at Google. So I already know that I've got a red flag that I'm about to deal with.
Yes. Well, getting back to the question too is, so I was him for a little while. When I was full-time, I wasn't. And some of the ways that I moved up, one was availability, like keeping myself busy with projects, hopefully ones that you like every now and then, especially if you're starting out. I mean, and this is kind of hard because I never got this information from someone who was working full-time. When I would go to conferences or talk to like thought leaders and things like that, is because usually when you're dealing with thought leaders and people at conferences, like I used to go to a lot of web conferences years ago, and you hear their philosophies now. So they're like, you have to, it's all about finding the right client, which it is. But when you're starving or, your car payment's late, things like that, it's about finding a client who will pay you money and not just destroy you through the project. It's finding something that's good enough for now so that you can move on to finding that right client. And it's a reality. It's not preferred, and it's definitely not what I would teach someone to do. But every now, I like really, really good food, but every now and then you have to eat something. You have to make a compromise so that you can eat.
Right.
So I think keeping the availability would help a lot. Like that even helps now because the scarcer you are, the more money your time is worth to you and to other people. Doing really, really good work, learning, like continuing to learn is a great way because, sorry, someone's in my mouth. The more, it's pet hair. The more that the more that, like, I guess, authority you have. So as things happen, like as soon as I started speaking too, and I could be like, and they'd be like, well, I don't know, you're like twice as much as this other guy. And I'd be like, well, and I think at the time I had like an Ignite video at the time. That was it. That was on YouTube. I'd be like, well, I've spoken at events, like, something that really didn't make that much sense. Anyone can speak at these things too. But I was like, well, check this out. Like, I'm on the internet for this. Like, I'm visible in a community about this stuff. Like, you can see me participating. You can see me speaking to a group of people. I'm not just, I'm not just the random guy who's breaking your website and running away with your $500. Maybe I'm charging you $1,000, but I'm not running away. Look at all the people who I interact with day to day. Like, you can't escape that. So it kind of gives an assurance there. The other thing is working with people that help you do that too. So a designer I worked with years ago, she was like not double my rate. She was higher. She put me to a benchmark hourly rate at the time that I wouldn't have ever charged. But she was working on a project. She said, no, this is the rate. And I started doing that. And once I was like, yeah. And these people are stoked about my work. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Because I think a lot of people don't realize what I had this conversation last night with my friend Drew. I think a lot of people don't realize, because there are a lot of amazing people out there that are doing amazing stuff, especially in the WordPress community. But in every online community, there is an exponential amount more on the internet that are doing awful stuff. Like, they're doing terrible things and charging probably more than you are for it, because people are falling for it, which is very tough for people like us, because you have to sell against that.
Yep.
And that's a huge wave, and you're like one person.
Right.
So working with people who are getting that and that also have that are getting positive feedback from their clients, that helped me a lot, because I was like, oh, cool. To the point where if you do good enough job, sometimes what will happen is I work on a project and unsolicited, the client will come back to me.
Yep.
So it's a lot of it's taking care of clients. Like, that's been my biggest thing since the get-go, is I've always been the guy that hates you get your car back and it's twice as much as they told you it was going to be. So I'll always overestimate for stuff, and I'll explain, but I'll be like, well, look, my goal is to never come back to you and say, hey, that stuff we talked about, it's going to be way more.
Yep.
It's expectations management. Like, I talk to Dre at Security all the time about, like, we'll talk about project stuff sometimes at WordCamps, and we always go back to expectations management. If people have properly set expectations, no one gets mad about unless one gets failed.
Yep.
So I guess that's kind of like computer science logic there.
Yeah, no, one of the presentation I did at the WordCamp in Providence was specifically about selling WordPress and kind of elevating yourself up from that $500 mark and $500 club. And that's part of it. Set the expectation, leverage what you're good at, connect with others if you need help with things in the WordPress community, and just start, pitching up and going up those rungs and start asking for a little bit more dollars. Perfect example, just like you said, there's partners that we work with that charge 10 times the amount that we charge. They do the same stuff as us, and when we work with them, their clients have the same exact pain points. They take months to give them content or review the site, or for SEO stuff, look at keywords, and it's like, I look at them and I'm like, wow, your clients are paying 10 times the amount and they're happy to do so, and they're still taking their time just like my clients are. So it's very interesting.
I also think that another way, if for people who are, they're trying to figure out how to get their pricing a little more manageable for themselves, not be working 70 hours a week doing stuff, is don't be, I guess I was like this for a long time, like, don't feel awkward about your own pricing. Mm-hmm. So, because that conversation always comes up, and it's always like, well, what's your hourly rate? Which is my least favorite question, because that doesn't tell you anything. It tells someone nothing about what you do or how much you're going to cost for a project. Because I've had projects where they're like, what's your hourly? Oh, that's twice as much. And I was like, I can cut it in half and take twice as long if you'd like. Like, does that make you feel better about the final price? I don't understand that. So I usually avoid ever talking about hourly rate unless it's like a nightmare, or it's something where I'm like, there's no way I can scope this. I need to do this hourly, and it's expensive because I don't know what I'm getting into.
Right.
But when you have that conversation, when I started moving my price up, they're like, well, what is your hourly rate? And then you would kind of, it's this. Like, you kind of don't want to tell them. You're worried they're going to run away. You're worried they're not going to value you at that. And if you don't value yourself at that rate, there's no way they're going to value yourself at that rate. So, and don't be a douchebag about it, but to be like, oh, say you're $100 an hour. My rate's $100 an hour. Like, instead of like, it's 100, but depending on the project, I can discount it. And they own you when you say that. Like, they own you. So not being scared of your own, like, and if you don't believe you're $100 an hour, then you're not yet. Like, believe it. If
Yeah.
you believe it, you're going to get some people that are like, hell no, no
Yeah.
way. And you're going to get some people that are like, okay, cool, let's see what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And just being cool with it's kind of like, I guess if you're on vacation, you're going to jump off a cliff into a big thing of water in some amazing tropical paradise. The first time you do that, it's scary. And then you're like, that was awesome. And I like doing this. So you're going to do it again. It's going to be easier and easier. And those conversations can evolve into something that even if someone doesn't like it, they can, if you're comfortable enough with it, I've had them evolve from like, that's just way too expensive. And then I won the project.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, it's a good.
The example I brought up with Amber was the Gary Vaynerchuk story where he's talking about pricing when he first started VaynerMedia before it was VaynerMedia, and he went to one person and said it was $5,000 a month, and they said yes. He went to the next guy and said $15,000 a month, and he said yes. Next guy said $25,000, he said yes. So he said, well, I'm just going to keep going until he went to like the $50,000 a month, and the guy told him to go F himself, and then he said, no, I can do it for $35,000 a month. So it was just keep on scaling, keep on pitching that price until you find what you're comfortable with, and you're right, you have to be comfortable with it, or else the client's going to see it and
I have a friend on the other side of Baltimore that has a small agency, and he bid a project, and they were concerned because he priced it so low.
Yep.
They were like, you're like a third of what all the other agencies sent in. And he was like, I scoped it. I was like, this is what I'm making money at this price. And they were like, yeah, you're like a third, like, we're not going to go with you. We don't think you know what you're doing. And I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.